everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ashley Craven, for those of you who are just now joining us, and I am the Marketing Director at Griffin House. Today we are pleased to have with us Dr. Sarah Garrity. I really appreciate everyone joining us to hear more about Dr. Garrity's presentation on effective discipline policies for young children and supporting social emotional competence, which is something that really affects everyone, be it principals to directors to teachers aides, etc. So we are very excited for today. Please do consider joining our community on EdWeb. So Griffin House is the sponsor of today's program or today's presentation. Griffin House, we're an award-winning publisher of resource books for parents and teachers of children aged 0 to 8. So filled with developmentally appropriate resources and easy-to-use strategies. All Griffin House books provide parents and teachers with the tools that they need to help bring the joy of learning to young students. So we are pleased to present today's webinar. So if you would like to learn more about Griffin House and like to learn more about other webinars that we're hosting, please do visit our community at the Early Learning Book Chats community on EdWeb. So you can get there by edweb.net/bookchats. There you'll be able to access tons of free stuff. So we have a bunch of free resources. We have webinars. You'll be able to access a recording of today's webinar and all other presentations we've done in the past, as well as calendar alerts and more information about presentations coming up in the future. We also have quizzes for CE certificates. So being a part of today's presentation, you will be eligible for a CE certificate. You also will be eligible for other CE certificates if you do watch other recordings or attend other webinars that are hosted on our community. So to get your CE certificate, which is incredibly important, and I'm sure a large reason why a lot of you like to take part in webinars, apart from just learning in general, to get your certificate, it will be emailed to you within 24 hours if you pre-registered or if you logged in today with your email address. However, if you joined the session exclusively by phone, or if you're watching this as a recording, thank you for joining us, you will get your CE quiz, but you'll need to take the CE quiz in order to get your certificate. So to find that quiz, just go to our community at edweb.net/bookchats. You can click on the EdWebinar Archives image and then select the particular webinar that you watched. As I said, Griffin House is delighted to present and sponsor today's webinar with Dr. Sarah Garrity. You can take a look at a number of titles that we just released this spring, including Dr. Garrity's book right there in the top center, Effective Discipline Policies. That and all other Griffin House titles are available at our website at griffinhouse.com. So take a look, and I hope you find some other resources that may interest you. If you are interested in purchasing Dr. Garrity's book or any other Griffin House book today, we are excited to offer you guys a special offer. We have 20% off if you use the discount code BOOKCHATS at checkout. So again, go to griffinhouse.com and at checkout, make sure you include that discount code. So without further ado, Dr. Sarah Garrity, we are so excited to have you. She's an associate professor in the Child and Family Development Department at San Diego State University. She obviously has some ties to Pittsburgh. So she was, prior to coming to SDSU, she was a preschool teacher, and she has extensive experience working in programs serving young children and their families. So she's worked in all different types of roles. Like I said, she's a preschool teacher. She's been an administrator, a coach, a consultant. She's a researcher. And she's also an author. So please take a look at her book, Effective Discipline Policies, at griffinhouse.com. And I'm sure you'll learn a little bit more about it today during Dr. Garrity's webinar. So I am going to turn the mic and the entire presentation over to Dr. Garrity. Thank you so much for joining us. Take it away.
Okay. Well, I just can't believe all the people that are here. This is super exciting for me. And thanks for all my Steelers shout outs and my Pittsburgh Penguins shout outs. But what we're going to talk about today is the book that my colleague, Dr. Sasha Longstreth, and I wrote called Effective Discipline Policies for Children Supporting Social Emotional Competence. So what we're going to talk about today is I'm going to welcome you, which I think we've done that already. I'm going to go over some goals. We're going to talk about why do we decide to focus on discipline policies? Why do we think policy is important? We're going to take some time explaining our humanistic approach to behavior guidance. And we're going to talk about our tool, which is the TAGPEC, which stands for the Teaching and Guidance Policies Essential Checklist. And this is something that my colleague and I developed via our research. And then we have some time for questions and discussions. So the objectives for today are to identify the reasons why a new approach to discipline is needed on a systemic level. And I think what makes our work unique is we really look at the early childhood setting as a system. And that in order for us to really support children, staff, and families, we need to have a strong infrastructure that supports the system. We also want to describe our humanistic approach to discipline, and we really believe in the unique potential of every child, and hopefully that will come through today as we have our webinar together. And then we wanted to introduce the TAGPEC, and we're going to take some time actually going through it. I'm going to explain it to you, so hopefully you all can use it in your programs. So here's our book, and this webinar accompanies our book. I told you the title. Sometimes I forget the title because it's so long. So you can just remember Effective Discipline Policies. And everything that I'm going to talk about today, all the tools, the TAGPEC, our humanistic approach, is included in this book. So I think that we've already done this poll, getting to know you. So I'm so excited to see people from all walks of life in early childhood. I think I saw some preschool teachers, some directors. I saw some K-2 folks, some third graders. So go ahead if you want to do a formal poll and tell me who you are. Are you a psychologist, a therapist, student support specialist? Is that everybody? Okay, I think we got a lot of good data on who everybody is. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. Okay. Maybe some people are still taking it. Oh. Well, it looks like people are still taking it. Okay. I also wanted to know a little bit about why you're here. So if you could go ahead and write in the comment section, what do you want to know about today? What most interests you? Struggle that you're having maybe? So that I can be really responsive to your needs as we go through the book and the TAGPEC. I love there's some librarians here. Okay, so I'm going to keep, you guys can keep typing. I'm going to go on. So talking about why us. This is supposed to be me and my colleague Sasha. And what got us interested in this topic? I think, like most of you, we have spent time as preschool teachers, administrators, consultants, and now our role really is to prepare the early care and education workforce. And we know how difficult, challenging behaviors can be. I always remember my first year as a teacher, I had my little boy, Andy, who I loved him, but he made my job challenging. I also know that as a director, my day could come to a halt dealing with challenging behaviors, either being in the classroom or talking to an upset parent or writing a report or really trying to find out ways to support my teachers. So we know that challenging behaviors are very difficult for early childhood programs. So we wanted to figure out how can we support programs to be more successful. We also really believe that when we would go into classrooms, we would see sometimes that classrooms were of different quality, centers were of different quality, and we really believe that there's a lot of information out there about what makes a high quality program, and we wanted to bring that to the workforce. We also really believe in equity, and when we talk about equity, it doesn't really mean that all children are treated fairly. I think actually we take the approach that maybe you can't treat children fairly, but we want to give children what they need to be successful, and that as the adults, it's our responsibility to make sure children are successful. So we use the word high quality a lot, but we know that high quality preschool programs are more likely to lead to proficiency in reading by third grade. children are more likely to graduate, and they're also more likely to succeed in the workplace. So high quality is kind of a buzzword, especially now, I think, more than ever before. And we know as early care and education professionals that caring for and educating young children is very rewarding, but it's also really difficult. And we believe that it's critical that systems are in place to support children, families, and staff to be their very best. I know out of all the jobs that I've ever had, the very most difficult one that I had was being a center director of a very large site. And it was super rewarding, and I loved the kids and my teachers, but it was stressful. So we really propose that effective high-quality behavior guidance policies are one way to support teaching and learning and to prevent and address challenging behavior in early childhood settings. And I think it's important to note that when we talk about early childhood, we really talk about 0 to 8. So we're talking about infant toddler programs, family child care, private, faith-based, Head Start. Those of you from Head Start, I worked at Head Start for many, many years, and it is in my heart, the same way the Pittsburgh Steelers are. And we also really include kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. We really wrote our book for administrators and principals because we know 0 to 8 is such a unique time period. So we also know that early childhood teachers report behavior problems as being the single greatest challenge in their work. And also that early child educators feel least prepared to deal with children's challenging behaviors. So it causes them a great deal of stress, and they really don't know what to do. Again, with my little guy, my first year teaching Andy, I just didn't know what to do. And I remember when early intervention would come in, and I'd get so excited because they wanted to help me. But I really just remember feeling sad that I didn't know what to do. So what Dr. Longstreth and I did is we really proposed that behavior guidance policies can be used to create an infrastructure that supports children, staff, families, and administrators. So that if you have a strong set of guidance policies that are based on best practices, it helps everybody to get on the same page. The guidance policy can really serve as a blueprint to guide the program as they make decisions about how to best handle and really how to best prevent challenging behaviors. So I mentioned earlier that we really do take the systems level approach. You know, it's interesting. I've worked with a lot of teachers, and some teachers, a behavior isn't even considered challenging, right? For other teachers, it could be very challenging. So it's important to really look at how the policy is related to the program and to the classroom, and also then how the classroom can inform the program policy. So it really is the systemic approach to intentionally addressing and preventing challenging behavior in the classroom. And again, we believe that policies are the best way to do this. So we developed the TAG pack, the Teaching and Guidance Policy Essentials Checklist. And it's a checklist that rates guidance policies using different points. So if the policy has one of our essential features, you give it a yes, which is 2 points. If one of the essential features or items is emerging, you give it 1 point. And if not, you give 0 points. And I'm going to talk about the emerging or the essential features in just a little bit. But really what programs can do is use the TAG pack to rate the quality of their discipline policy. And the higher the score, the higher the quality of the policy. So there's Dr. Longstreth and I getting ready to do our study. We did our study about 3 years ago. What we did is we sent out an email to all of the centers that were accredited by the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And we asked them to take a survey. And we also asked them to upload their discipline policy. And what we did is we looked at the discipline policies that we received and we scored them using the TAG pack. And what did we find? So there is a total of 56 points at that time that was possible to get score on the TAG pack. What do you all think? Do you think that programs scored 40 and above, 30 to 39, 20 to 29, or under 20? How do you think programs did? What was the quality of their behavior guidance policies? Okay, I see some coming in. Okay, you guys want to see the answer? Okay, so the highest score out of 56 was a 46, and I have to say it was a Head Start program. I was happy to see that. The lowest score was a 1, not too good. The average score was a 21. So it means the policies we looked at really didn't contain a lot of evidence-based practices. Overall, programs did really well with the relationship part. They did really well with redirection, some of those kind of strategies. What they didn't do really well with was reaching out to families. They didn't really do well with using data to inform their decision-making processes. We're going to talk about, hopefully you all are familiar, I know you early intervention people are familiar with the teaching pyramid, so they didn't really talk a lot about some of those second and third tier strategies, but it was really, really interesting for us because it kind of gave us a snapshot of what discipline policies across the nation and in lots of different settings look like. So these findings really made us think really hard about what are the underlying assumptions of behavior guidance policies, because policies sometimes really reflect what we believe about children, how we kind of believe children to be. And unfortunately, a lot of the policies we looked at were pretty much guidelines to get kids kicked out of the program. It was really, if you have three times you're sent home or 3 referrals, then you're not welcome in our program anymore. So we really thought about, what is our own philosophy about challenging behavior? So what we decided was that we really wanted to focus on guidance rather than discipline. And we actually added the name teaching and guidance to our tool because that was so central to what we believe in. And we really believe that the role of the caregiver is to teach children appropriate ways to behave. A lot of times kids don't know how to act. I always remember my daughter, I'd take her to the playground and she would push because she didn't have the words to say, I want to play. And I had to teach her how to say those words so that she didn't get hit back. We also really don't believe in the use of strategies that are punitive, degrading, or dehumanizing. A lot of times discipline, unfortunately, is equated with punishment. And we really want to think about teaching and guidance. And we also really wanted to be preventive rather than reactive. I know it's hard when you're in the classroom and something happens and you just want to react. I've done it many times, but we really wanted to think of ways, again, that we could use this scaffolding and this blueprint to be preventive. We also really believe that child behavior is transactional in nature, with both caregivers and the child contributing to the relationship. I think if we're all honest with ourselves, there are some kids that we just naturally click with, and maybe there are some kids that we don't naturally click with. So really recognizing our role in that relationship. We also know that problem behaviors occur in the context of relationships, so they're best resolved within that context and also really via the socialization practices of the teacher or the caregiver. Oops. Okay, so we came up with this humanistic approach, and we really drew from Maslow and Rogers. And our approach to behavior guidance views children as having this innate capacity for self-actualization. And it's really grounded in the belief that each child has the creative capacity and free will to work towards his or her best self. So what does that mean? It means that as teachers, it's our job to help the child be their very best self and to reach their potential. And that potential is going to look different for every child, depending on the child, because we're all so different. I also really wanted to point out that we don't have time to talk about it in this webinar today, but we really felt that it was important to address culture and language. And the TAGPEC and our humanistic approach helps guide programs to develop policies that promote cultural and linguistic diversity as strengths. And in some earlier versions of the tool, we really didn't talk too much about culture, but we really felt that it was important to add this in. What role does language have? So chapter 3 in our book talks about culture and language. Something else that we thought was super important to include in our book was the role of trauma-informed care. Both Dr. Longstreth and I, we're not clinical psychologists, we're not pediatricians, we're just kind of early childhood people. And we really felt like if we were going to talk about challenging behavior, we needed to talk about trauma. So we were really lucky. We asked our friend, he's a pediatrician, Dr. Pradeep Gidwani, and his colleague, who's a child psychologist, and they wrote the last chapter in our book, is about trauma-informed care. Because unfortunately, we know lots of kids come to us having been exposed to trauma, and it can be really challenging. So we are having an upcoming webinar on September 11th where we're going to be talking just about that chapter because we know how important it is. So I'd like you just to think for a minute about a child in your program whose challenging behavior has negatively impacted your classroom or program in some way. I know if I close my eyes, I can think about that one or two kids that really they were challenging for me, right? So think about that child and just have that child in your mind as we go through the rest of the webinar. I also wanted to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs because it is so central to our humanistic approach. And really what Maslow proposed is that all of us, if we're going to reach self-actualization, we need to be fed. We need to feel safe. We need to feel loved. And all this stuff then leads to self-esteem and self-actualization. And unfortunately, a lot of the kids who come into our program are kind of at these lower levels of the pyramid. It's not the pyramid, it's a triangle, sorry. And I always think about a situation that I had a couple weeks ago where I got up out of bed and I was really sick. I wasn't feeling well, but I had to go and teach my class. And then I had a lunchtime meeting and it was just not a good day. And I remember I put on some little shoes and went to class. I taught my class. I get out of my class and it's raining. And I was thinking, oh, I really don't want to go to this meeting, but they're going to give me lunch. If I go to this meeting, at least I'll get lunch, which is bad, but it shows you my state of mind, right? I was not feeling self-actualized. So I walk to the meeting. I step in a puddle. I get to the meeting finally. I'm late. I'm wet. I'm tired. I'm hungry. And the man who is in charge of the meeting says, oh, Sarah, I'm so sorry. We didn't know you were coming. We don't have lunch for you. And how do you think I felt? Oh, I wanted to cry. So I sat down in the meeting. I was totally disengaged. I wasn't paying attention. And then I noticed that somebody from, not Taco Bell, what's the other one? Rubio's. Rubio's is this great taco place here in San Diego. Came to the door and delivered food. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, is this food for me? I don't know. And then somebody got up from the edge of the table and she came over and she touched me. And she said, Sarah, we got you some food. And all of a sudden, I went up to the top of that triangle, right? And I felt so much better. I felt secure. I felt taken care of. I wasn't hungry anymore. And I was really able to participate in the meeting in a very self-actualized way. So sometimes I think when we think about Maslow, it's helpful to think about our own selves, right? So think about for a minute, what would it look like if your child who you struggle with was self-actualized? If your child was his or her very best self, what would that look like for him? And it's going to look different for every child. I think it's important to mention. Whoops. I almost skipped the most important slide. Okay, so these are the 5 assumptions of our humanistic approach. And the first one that I've talked with quite a bit is the role of the adult is to teach children appropriate social emotional skills. I think sometimes we think that kids come into school just knowing how to behave, and they really don't. Some kids are really good at maybe reading other children's facial expressions. Other kids, maybe not so much. And you might have to say, Jose, look at Luis's face. Look at how you made him feel, and really teach that kind of stuff. The second is that relationships guide and regulate behavior. Again, when that woman came down and touched me and said, Sarah, there's some food there for you, it just made me feel so much better because of that relationship, right? This last one is key to my understanding of challenging behavior, is that behavior is communication. So when my daughter on the playground goes and pushes another child, she's not doing it to be mean or to hurt them. She's doing it because she wants to play and she doesn't have the words. So figuring out what the child is communicating with that behavior. Think about in your own life. If your significant other, you're upset and they say, well, how are you doing? And you say, oh, I'm fine. Your behavior is not communicating that you're fine. Right? It's communicating that you really aren't fine. So challenging behavior is communication that something's not going right with the child. Another thing that we really always come back to is that each child is a unique individual. So think for a minute about your siblings, about your own children, about children in the classroom. You know, me and my brother cannot be more different from each other. My children cannot be more different. So you really have to individualize and find out what works for that child. Things like acculturation status, immigration status, language, even birth order, right? I'm a firstborn child, and that impacts my personality because I'm a firstborn. So thinking about those kind of things. And then the last assumption, which we feel is really important, is that implicit bias affects decision-making. So there's been a lot of news and a lot of research done lately on implicit bias. And whenever I think about implicit bias, I think about a time where I was studying to get my doctoral degree in a program that was very focused on social justice. And I went into my son's kindergarten class, and the teacher was doing a great guided writing activity about their recent trip to the park. And it was such a great activity, and I'm watching, and I noticed this little boy who had his head in his hands like this, and he was rocking back and forth. And there goes my implicit bias kicking in. What did I think? Oh, he must be autistic, right? I knew nothing about this child, but immediately my mind went there. And then later on, I found out, no, he wasn't autistic. He just spoke Spanish, and this was his first time ever being in a school. So I tell that story because I think it just shows how powerful implicit bias can be, and hopefully programs can use the tag pack to interrupt this implicit bias when it comes to decision making. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Oops. Okay, so I want you to again think about yourself, right? And think about, let's say that you woke up late, you were driving to work, you hit all the red lights, you spilled your coffee all over your briefcase, and you get into work and somebody greets you with these words. Oh, you're finally here. We've been waiting for you. Come on inside and get to work. Everybody else has been here for an hour working really hard. How would you feel? Right? You probably feel even more angry. You might feel like even hitting something, right? And unfortunately, sometimes I think that's the way kids feel. They feel angry, they feel frustrated. So think again about another scenario where same thing happens. You wake up late, red lights, spill your coffee, crazy, crazy day. And instead, somebody comes up to you and says, you know, Sarah, you look really stressed out. I know you have a busy day today, and there's some parents waiting to talk to you, but why don't you get a cup of coffee, and I'll tell the parents that you're going to be there in just a minute. How would you feel? Calm, you would feel valued, you would feel heard. Your behavior was sending a message, and somebody actually read your message and responded appropriately. So I think it's really important to kind of put ourselves in the shoes of children sometimes and think about our own feelings and how we feel when we're frustrated or angry, and how other people through their relationship with us can kind of help us to regulate our own behavior. Well, let me go ahead and talk a little bit about our tool, the Tag Pack. Like I said, the tool is made of essential features, and there are 7 essential features that we talk about in the Tag Pack. And you'll see as I talk about them that they really reflect our humanistic approach to behavior guidance. So the first essential feature is an intentional focus on teaching social emotional skills. Developing a culturally and developmentally appropriate learning environment is the second essential feature. Then there's setting behavioral expectations. Preventing and addressing challenging behaviors using a tiered model of intervention. So hopefully you all are familiar with RTI or the teaching pyramid. That really is a big part of our work because that is an evidence-based practice, and they really provide great strategies that have been shown to work. The 5th essential feature is working with families. The 6th is staff training and professional development. And then the 7th is the use of data for continuous improvement. So what the Tag Pack is it really is just a checklist, and underneath each one of those essential features are different items that help you assess whether or not you're meeting that essential feature. So for example, the first essential feature, which is do these policies reflect an instructional proactive approach to teaching children how to behave. So one of the items would be the policy clearly states that the goal of behavior guidance is to teach social emotional skills to all children. So that really should be in the forefront of your mind and in the forefront of your policy. Another item under Essential Feature 1 that has to do with teaching is the policy clearly describes the role of positive and consistent interaction among teachers and children in promoting positive behavior. The second essential feature, like I said, is developmentally and culturally appropriate learning environments. And this is something that we tweaked a little bit from our earlier iterations of the TAGPEC. We really thought about, what does it mean for an environment to be developmentally appropriate? I think we all kind of know that. But where it gets a little bit more tricky is what does it mean for a environment to be culturally or linguistically appropriate? And in our book, we give lots of vignettes from our real world experiences. What does it look like to be a dual language learner coming into a classroom where you don't speak the language? Or what does it look like when you're a tall African-American boy coming into the classroom? How can we really, as early childhood educators, meet the needs of lots of different children in culturally and linguistically and developmentally appropriate ways? So all of the items under Essential Feature 2 talk about how policies can reflect the importance of a developmentally and culturally appropriate learning environment. Then the third essential feature is setting behavioral expectations, and there are 5 items that fall under that essential feature. And this really has to do with something that we didn't see programs had a lot of in their discipline policies. My guess is that some of the K1, 2, 3 people have these, but we didn't see it a lot in early childhood, was these behavioral expectations. So be kind, be respectful, hands to yourself. So some of these program-wide behavioral expectations that can then get set into classroom rules. So really having this strong vision for what supporting behavior looks like in our center, in our program, in our school. And that's why policies are so important, so that everybody knows about these behavioral expectations. Then Essential Feature 4 was preventing and addressing challenging behaviors using a tiered model of intervention. And we don't care which model you use. We talk in the book about the teaching pyramid. But for an example, an item under this essential feature would be the policy clearly describes primary strategies to teach and reinforce prosocial behavior in all children. Again, in our study, programs did really well with these. Item 20 is the policy describes targeted secondary strategies for children who are at risk for problem behaviors. Again, we didn't see that a lot in the policies, and we think it's really important that teachers get support for kids who are kind of in that second tier, that they might need a little bit more help than some of the other children. Another thing that we added in this essential feature that we thought was really important is, are there procedures in place to screen children for behavioral concerns? Because the evidence tells us that the earlier you can begin working with children, the more effective it's going to be. So we really recommend that all programs adopt a tool such as maybe the Ages and Stages or the Devereaux, really to identify children who might be at risk so that program staff can start working with them right away. Essential feature number 5 is working with families. I know when I was a center director and a teacher, working with families was the part of my job that I loved the most, but it was also a challenging part of my job. So really talking about, how do you approach this from a preventive standpoint rather than just calling parents in after the problem has already arisen. So we also talk a lot about, for example, in item 24, the policy describes the need for obtaining contextually and culturally relevant information, for example, at-home sleeping and eating habits, family events, favorite toys and activities from families in order to understand children's inappropriate behavior. I know when I would attend IEP meetings, one of the first things I would say is, tell me what your child likes the best. What does your child really love to do? Because then if you can build interventions around those things, you guys are early childhood, you have to build things around children's interest. Essential feature 6 is staff training and professional development. and it states that early childhood behavior guidance policies, should ensure that staff have access to training and technical assistance in implementing policy guidelines and promoting the social competence of young children. So we want to make sure, again, if you think about behavior guidance policies as a blueprint, you want to make sure that everybody's on the same page, that staff understand the policies, that they revisit them, that the training is ongoing and it really is embedded into professional development. So essential feature 7 was the use of data for continual improvement, and this has been shown to really help interrupt implicit bias. So if you really look at the numbers, if you really look at the number of suspensions, if you really look at the data and use it to help you make decisions, it can kind of help you to not only improve your policy, but also to interrupt some of those decision points where maybe you're not being equitable to all children. And like I said, programs really didn't do so great on that one. So how do you use the TAGPEC? In our book, we provide lots of tools for you to use. And one of the first things that we talk about is building a team and deciding who's important to be on that team. So it's an administrator, you want teachers, you might want early intervention. Some people that I think are really important are the office support and the support staff. You know, you want to have your administrative assistants. You want to have your bus drivers maybe. You want to have those key people who really interact with the kids quite a bit. So think about who should be on the team. Parents, of course, should be on the team. And then what we'd like you to do, what we suggest, is that you gather all your available discipline policy documents. When we collected our policies, we found that they were kind of embedded in a lot of different places. So some programs had, here's our discipline policy. Some programs said, here's our parent handbook. You can find stuff about discipline throughout there. Some people said, here's our staff handbook. Some people sent us the behavior matrix, you know, be kind, be respectful, hands to yourself. So it's important to think about in your program all the different places where behavior guidance and discipline are discussed so that you can pull them together into one place. And then you actually administer the TAGPEC. And if you go to our website, we have a webinar on how to actually score the TAGPEC. What's nice about it is you can score based on the overall policy and get an overall policy score, but you can also score based on each of the essential features. So you can say, you know, we really do well on the essential feature working with families, but we don't do so well with tiered models of support. So it really allows you to kind of hone in and target areas that you want to improve. And I should mention that the TAGPEC can be used with existing discipline policies, or it can be used to really craft new policies if you want to start from scratch. And in the book, we give sample statements. So for example, the slide that I'm looking at right now has a policy excerpt for essential feature number 1. And let me see if I can read it. It's kind of small. I don't think that I can. But if you look in the book, there's actual sample policies. And I think it's really important to remember that we don't want all policies to look the same, that programs are really, really different. You need to think about your program's purpose. You need to think about your funding source. But I think it is really helpful. And one of the things we really worked hard on in the book is to have some sample policies that you all can look at. And that's kind of all that I had. The next steps were to kind of ask you guys some questions and do our Q&A.
So looking through all of the questions that you guys shared, we did have quite a number of questions shared, both in the attendee chat and also the question portal. So starting off with some of the frequent questions we were getting, let's see. So someone was asking about how do we encourage an anxious child play with toys and on the playground. So this child's three years old and will turn in circles to stay rooted in the spot unless his nanny stays with him. So this person was looking for some strategies or maybe some recommendations to help this child even though he's very anxious and maybe doesn't want to play with other people on the playground.
Ashley, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question for me?
Oh, of course, yeah. So someone that asked a question about encouraging anxious children. So the example that this person shared was that, you know, there's
a 3-year-old child who's on the playground refuses to play with other toys, but he'll just turn in circles or, stay rooted in his spot unless his nanny comes and stays with him. So I guess, just looking for suggestions on how to encourage, an anxious child to maybe introduce himself to other friends or to maybe, play with others nicely.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think one of the things that we found in some of our research is that when we think about challenging behaviors, a lot of times it's, the kicking, the biting, those kind of behaviors. And I love that this question addressed, one of those children who might have anxiety or more of those internalizing behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Because those kids, if we think about behavior as communicating something, that child is clearly communicating something with her behavior. So I would just recommend a couple of things. One is just remembering how important the relationship with the teacher, and if a teacher can really try to never give up on that child, keep trying to form a relationship so she can help that child to kind of self-regulate and go out and teach her the skills needed to make friends. I'm also surprised that the nanny is there. I don't know what kind of program this is, but again, I think it's important to really think of each child as an individual and look at those different contextual factors that might be causing the child to act this way. I also think it's really important, one of the items, I think under Essential Feature 4 that I just talked about was to do a developmental screening for behavioral concerns. This might be a child who needs a referral to maybe an early childhood mental health consultant or maybe to special education, but really the important role of relationships, treating every child as an individual, recognizing that that behavior really is a communication that something's not right, and then the importance of developmental screening so that everybody can get a little bit more help.
Yeah, that's great. That's perfect. I think what you said, a lot of environmental context too, I think that's certainly helpful. So, kind of a little bit similar to the question of an anxious 3-year-old, but someone was asking about, some defiance or maybe managing defiant children. So this person shared how, some children, when they say no, that is it. So maybe looking for recommendations on how to help maybe, work around defiant children. Again, when they say no, they mean no, and that's it.
Yeah, and again, it's kind of hard for me because I think the whole message of our book is you need to understand each child and each child's context that they're developing in. So what I would do for one child who says no might be very different than another child who says no. There might be a child who says no because they don't understand the language. There might be another child who says no because they have been experienced to trauma. There might be another child that says no just because they have a feisty little temperament. So I think really saying that there's one, I always tell my students, it depends, and I think they get upset with me because they want one right answer, but I think really the message of this humanistic approach is that every child's different, and you need to make sure that that child gets what they need to be successful.
Right, and I think that, so that answer, I think, applies well to the last question that we have time for today, and I really think you answered it already, but I'll share the question just for the greater group. So someone asked about your advice for, quote, keeping your cool with constant crying children. So someone shared that one girl in her class just turned 3 in April, and she cries about everything, whenever she doesn't get her way. Her automatic response is crying. So the question was, what's your advice on how to talk to her? But it sounds like, again, you really kind of answered that. It's different with every child. Every child has different needs, different environmental contexts, and et cetera. So do you have anything to add on to that? Or, you really did answer it, I think.
No, and I think that I love these questions because they're the real deal. People are in the classroom struggling with what to do with these children. And what Dr. Longstrath and I really realized is that policies can be helpful for that. So we don't want a teacher alone in a classroom trying to figure out, oh my gosh, how am I going to deal with this child? How am I going to manage my own emotions when I'm ready to tear my hair out because I am so frustrated? Whereas if you have these policies that are evidence-based, that everybody's on board, everybody speaks the same language, I also think that's where the professional development part comes in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a teacher shouldn't really feel alone struggling with these things. Hopefully there's some time built in for reflective practice, for everybody to get together, to look at the data around some of these kids. You know, like, does she only cry? Well, she cries all the time. But does she cry harder at this time of the day? And really work together as a team to be supportive.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's certainly helpful. So that is unfortunately all the time we have today for questions. However, for those of you who are still on the line, we do recommend that you post your questions on our blog. If you go to edweb.net/bookchats, and you can visit our community, you can chat your questions in our blog, you can post them directly with this particular webinar, and Dr. Garrity will have a chance to review them and answer your questions there. So while we only have the opportunity to answer a few questions, we promise we will answer all of your questions. So thank you again, Dr. Garrity. This was awesome. And thank you all for joining us today. And thank you all for joining us today. Please do visit griffinhouse.com if you are interested in looking into Dr. Garrity and Dr. Longstaff's book, Effective Discipline Policies. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a promotion running for you guys, for our attendees. If you use the promo code BOOKCHATS at checkout, you can get 20% off of your order. So I do recommend you use that. And lastly, but certainly not least, Griffin House is delighted and proud to sponsor today's webinar presentation with Dr. Garrity, and we thank you all for your time. And again, post your questions on edweb.net/bookchats and visit our website for to look through our books and resources. Thanks again, everyone.